this is in the general public as well as scientists.
This is Tara Fazzino from the University of Kansas. Recently, she published a study in the journal Addiction, shedding new light on how some of America's most popular food brands managed to become so popular. A good chunk of them, she says, were brought to you by the minds at Big Tobacco.
Between the 80s and the early 2000s, Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, their food companies just dominated the U.S. food supply.
Decades ago, Philip Morris bought Kraft General Foods. You know, the mac and cheese, the Jell-O, the Oscar Mayer hot dogs.
Oh, I wish there was an Oscar Mayer wiener.
R.J. Reynolds, one of the other major tobacco brands, took over Nabisco.
Nabisco had Oreo, Teddy Grahams, Ritz and Premium crackers.
This study describes how through the end of the century, these foods look off in a way that might sound familiar to those who know the history of big tobacco. According to researchers, these foods flooded the pleasure centers in our brains, despite not being very good for us.
They're very rewarding to consume, and they can be difficult to stop eating.
So what's happening in my brain when I bite into an Oreo versus like an apple or something? What's happening?
The Oreo contains fat and sugar at reasonably high levels, and so what can happen with those together in an Oreo is that they can have sort of an exaggerated effect on our brain reward neurocircuitry and make that a very, very pleasurable experience to bite into that Oreo.
At the same time they were buying these foods, executives from Big Tobacco were doing what they do best, selling them to as many people as possible.
Every big tobacco company has a lab that makes colors and flavors and artificial things that they put into cigarettes. That's why menthol is in cigarettes, for example.
This is Laura Schmidt. She's a professor at the medical department for UC San Francisco, which has compiled the country's largest archive of records from these tobacco companies.
So back in 1962, the head of this division within R.J. Reynolds, we have in an actual document from inside this company, came to the higher-ups and said, hey, we got all these colors and flavors and we don't really know what to do with them. Maybe we should stop thinking about ourselves as just a tobacco company and start thinking about ourselves as in the flavor business. And within a few years, R.J. Reynolds had bought a company called Hawaiian Pacific. And Hawaiian Pacific sold one thing, Hawaiian Punch.
Yeah, Hawaiian Punch. I remember this from my childhood. But before that, back in the 60s, it was sold as a cocktail mixer for adults. Well, now, with the power of the Big Tobacco marketing team, everything changed.
Yeah. Hey, 700 pounds in Hawaiian Punch.
The packaging was now in bright colors, blues and reds. It had a mascot on TV, Punchy.
And he would say, how about a Hawaiian Punch and punch you in the face?
Hey, how about a nice Hawaiian Punch?
Sure. By the 80s, Big Tobacco was being condemned for marketing to kids. Schmidt says in this new flavor space, though, any market research was in play, and that flavor, she says, revolutionized food advertising.
The other thing that tobacco companies are really, really good at is what they call line extensions, which means we only make one thing, really, which is a cigarette. And so how can we market it to all different kinds of people? Well, we'll make Virginia Slims for women who want to lose weight. And we'll sell menthol cigarettes, cool, to target the black community. And we'll...
And really hyper-focusing on where your marketing dollars are going.
Exactly. And of course you have your Camels and your Marlboros for the couch potato males who hang out on and wish they were a cowboy.
This, she says, is why Kool-Aid and Tang are different products. Think about it, they're both just sugary powdered drinks. But according to these documents, Kool-Aid should be marketed to black families. Oh, yeah! Well, Tang was favored by Latino audiences. Lunchables became the thing for the upwardly mobile. Your kid can assemble their own charcuterie plate. It gives them agency, despite being loaded with sodium. The result was these foods defined a generation of kids. I should know. I was one of these children that lit up for a Lunchable.
Hit that like button, subscribe if you're still watching, guys. Support the channel, man. Tony's View.
Seeking what scientists now call a bliss point.
The U.S. population has the highest rates of obesity in the world. 68% of our food supply is hyperpalatable foods, most of them ultra processed by these companies. A majority of our population, 82% of us adults, have one chronic disease or more. That could be hypertension, that could be diabetes, prediabetes.
These food companies are no longer owned by tobacco firms. They were sold in the new century. R.J. Reynolds didn't respond to requests for comments, neither did Altria, which is what Philip Morris is now known as. But Kraft Heinz said in a statement to us that the findings of the study do not accurately represent our current portfolio of products.
He's eating it backwards too, man. Look at that, guys.
Because they're committed to health and
Most
nutrition, they have a wide portfolio.
most rats eat it. How they eat it, guys?
Doesn't dispute there's more variety now. In fact, he doesn't even claim that tobacco
Start usually from
trying to
the
make
head
these products
first.
less healthy. What she does say is that these hyper tasty, hyper marketed foods became the norm in this country.
Competitors may have observed the success of the tobacco brands and updated their formulations in a manner to ensure that they retain, kind of their competitiveness with them.
40 years ago, there was a wide gap in the ingredients you'd find in a big tobacco-owned product versus the rest of the marketplace. As of 2018, when you compare the products from these companies once owned by Big Tobacco and their competitors now, she says there's hardly a difference. The country followed Kraft, and that legacy isn't going up in smoke anytime soon. This is the worst feeling because you get nostalgic about stuff. Then you realize, wait, so actually that thing was bad for me, but I still love Lunchables? Very complicated feelings. Hey, really cool news, by the way. We've been nominated for the Signal Awards, which honor the best podcasts out there. Like, they're specifically for podcasts, so we're really jazzed about this. We were nominated for Best News and Politics Show. And here's the thing to know about the Signal Awards. There's an audience voting component to this. So, here's what you can do. We set up a link in today's episode description where you just go to the show right now, you scroll down, click this link, it'll take you straight to our categories. You can vote for us. Super easy. And in fact, I did it just to make sure it would be easy for you. It took me 2 minutes. So, yeah, and I voted for us. So what? We're really good. I'm Brett Milkey. See you tomorrow.
You're watching America's #1 streaming news.
This is Sadie. She's on Verizon, and she's got the new My Plan, so she gets exactly what she wants and only pays for what she needs.
What if you could make a couple extra $1,000 a month using one little app on your phone? Well, I want to show you what it is and how to do it. So this is the app right here, guys. It's the Facebook app. And did you know that while most people are using Facebook to see what their friends are doing or just chatting back and forth, myself and the students I've taught this to are using Facebook to make thousands of dollars.
Well, good evening from London and welcome to a special edition of Piers Morgan Uncensored. Dr. Jordan Peterson, one-on-one. The clinical psychologist turned culture warrior and one of the world's most famous and infamous intellectuals. His books are instant bestsellers, tens of millions watch him online. Legions of fans swear by his straight-talking guidance.
What I'd recommend to people is clean up your room.
But his outspoken views on issues like feminism,
The taming of the wild man, essentially, by the desirable and virginal woman. And if you think women don't want that, then you better bloody well come up with an explanation for 50 Shades of Grey.
gender.
You won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy, yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run.
And made a lightning rod for controversy. Almost 40 million people have now seen this notorious interview with a British news show.
You're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me, and that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
Ha! Gotcha. Celebrity friends face criticism just for meeting him. He's laughed, he's loathed, he's never ignored. And tonight, Jordan Peterson is uncensored. Well, Jordan Peterson joins me now. Jordan Peterson, welcome. Thank you to Piers Morgan Uncensored. I suppose my first question, and there will be people genuinely wanting a simple answer,
Yeah.
but there's a bigger answer too. Who is Jordan Peterson?
Well, I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor, and I'm doing that on a broader scale now, I suppose. But it's an extension of what I've done since 1987, really. And I taught the same things I'm teaching, although I've expanded them all throughout my academic career. My classes were very popular, and not popular exactly. The students found them extremely useful. And
Should any lectures at any university ever be popular? Should they always be challenging? Because one of the problems we have in modern society is that students aren't challenged enough.
Well, they were challenging. They were plenty challenging. I mean, the students had two comments. Usually they said, it's very difficult for me to talk to anyone else about what I'm learning in this class because it's so different, and also that it changed the way I look at everything. So there's no shortage of challenge. Yeah, I mean, everyone wants an optimal challenge. You know, that's in the nature of play, to have an optimal challenge.
But why have you become so notorious? Because I look at it as, I've actually watched a lot of your lectures. I've listened to hours of you and Joe Rogan talking about stuff. I don't see the devil that some people try and portray you as, at all. And it seems to me the one thing we may share in common is certainly not intellectual prowess, but unfortunately I'm many yards behind you. But what we do share, I think, is that a lot of people seem to draw an opinion about it based on either what they've seen in a tiny clip, taken out of context a lot of the time, or what they've been told to think about you by other people.
Yeah, well, that's some of it. I mean, I got tangled up in a political controversy in Canada. I mean, tangled up. I put my foot in it to some degree because I wasn't very happy with what I regarded as government overreach in relationship to who is in possession of my tongue. And I decided a long time ago, and really a long time ago, that I was going to say what I thought. And sort of independent of the outcome. You know, often people craft their speech. You know, I could have come here on your show, for example, I spent half an hour thinking, well, what do I want out of this show? But I don't think like that. I wanted to come here and have a conversation with
You don't actually make notes, I'm told, before your big.
I make notes, but I generally don't use them. So I have to prepare, you know.
And are they different when you go on tour? Is every night different?
Yes. I never do this.
How do you decide what to talk about?
Well, at the moment, sometimes I'm taking questions from the audience, and so I just do a Q&A, but I don't look at the questions before I go on stage. And I ask my wife, who asked me the questions, not to show them to me. And then if I prepare a lecture, I usually have a question in mind. Often it relates to one of the topics in my books, but sometimes something I'm thinking about, and then I use the lecture as an opportunity to explore that question and answer it while I'm watching the audience to see if my words are landing. And so it's an opportunity to think on my feet. And I think part of the reason the lectures are well attended is because it's a high wire act in some sense. Because I never know when I go on stage whether I'm going to bring the lecture to something like a punchline, to something like a conclusion. So, and I have no idea, because I'll have a variety of ideas up in the air.
That's extraordinary. You have no idea where it may lead to.
No. It's an
Is that
exploration.
not scary? I mean,
Yes. But, you know, there's an idea that the truth will set you free, right? And that's a very strange idea. Because you could imagine that I could come here and I could decide there are things I want to do to promote my books, let's say, and I could tilt our conversation towards that. Or I could just say, well, I'm going to pay attention to what's going on here, and I'm going to see what happens, and I'm going to say what I think. And then I'm going to assume that whatever the outcome is the right outcome because it was based on something approximating the truth.
What is your goal? What is the point of Dr. Jordan Peterson? What do you hope to achieve through what is now huge global fame?
I hope to encourage people. Other than that, I want to see what happens. You know, I want to say what I believe to be true as clearly and carefully as I possibly can, and I want to see what happens as a consequence. And what people don't understand about that, in some sense, is happiness. The purpose of your life is not going to be happiness.